Hello, it's the Culture Genie, and the subject matter of this episode of Dark Side History will be the reality of warfare in the past, and why war in the past, if anything, was just as terrible as today. There seems to be this myth that in the past, before modern warfare, in the First World War, war was clean, and war was not as terrible as it was today with modern artillery killing you from afar or getting bombed by airplanes or killed by bullets from machine guns. It was man to man, clean, and honorable, depending upon definition of honorable. However, the truth is that war has always been unclean and rather terrible for all involved. Even back in the ages of swords, spears, and bayonets on muskets, it was terrible. As war is the large-scale application of violence and killing to achieve political aims. And in the past, before artillery, it was often very up-close and personal, with the exception of some ranged weapons, such as slings or bows. And I remember in the past when I once read about an Arabic raid into Byzantine territory, where one of the people involved in this raid had been dragged down from his horse, and how he, when the Byzantine soldier was above him, as he was wrestling with him above him, managed to get hold of his short sword and stab him in such a way that the contents inside of the Byzantine soldier, the Byzantine's intestines, dropped upon him. And he describes how he vomited afterwards because of the smell and just of the visual experience. Old warfare was anything but clean. You would get covered in dirt and covered in blood and intestines and other body fluids, depending upon how close up the fighting was. And sometimes it could be very close up. This was especially the case in formation warfare during Antiquity, with, for example, hoplite formations and Roman legionary formations, where you would see the one you were about to kill in the eyes as you did it, and also see the one that was about to kill you in the eyes. It was very personal and up close and terrifying because of it, which is probably one of the reasons as to why the Greeks and the Romans focused so much on instilling discipline in their troops, because it was probably needed to condition soldiers for this type of warfare, where you have to fight someone very close up, and if your formation breaks, you're as good as dead, because the killing starts once a couple of persons break formation and or people begin to flee. And the same issues were also present in formation warfare from a bit more afar, such as the Greek phalanx or the pike formations from the Renaissance and up to the 17th century. They were not good to be in either. Can you imagine being speared by a pike as two pike formations are about to engage each other, standing there knowing that you are on the front line of it and just waiting to get pierced? However, if you break formation, your entire formation will suffer the fate of probably getting killed. And this is only discussing infantry against infantry. Remember, in all the types of warfare, you also had the risk of getting trampled by horses and cavalry charging towards you, as that was always a danger in old times. And sometimes it was not only horses, but camels and elephants too, and some other popular animals that were used as cavalry. And you have to know that camels can be very frightening and are actually quite large. And like horses, they are also very good at biting and kicking. So being in close melee was not especially pleasant in old times. But being attacked by ranged weapons was not much better. Slings could, for example, sling various sorts of rocks towards you that might not kill you unless they hit your head, but they might break bones and cripple you so that you cannot fight any longer. And arrows, if you are armed enough, are not likely to kill you either, but they could slink into various portions of your armor where your armor is not as strong and cause bleeding and wounds that might not be directly lethal but could be lethal later due to infection. And similarly, it is not especially fun being in a formation of musketeers or line infantry or riflemen and waiting to get shot in these musket volleys or get shot by artillery. And in both melee and in ranged combat in the past, many times it was not a direct kill when a hit was scored by a weapon, but most probably just a wounding, which meant that the battle could actually carry on and you could be forced to fight wounded or not be able to finish off your enemy quickly, making his pain and suffering continue. And even if you manage to survive the battle, the wounds you have sustained could prove lethal due to infections later, as modern medical knowledge was not present at older battlefields in the same way as it's today. Meaning that there was a great risk that you would suffer an agonizing death through infection even if you survived the initial battle. And now I've spoken about combat, but not all warfare is combat. In fact, the majority of warfare throughout history has been waiting upon the enemy to arrive or being in sieges, which could last months or even years. And when time was not spent waiting, it was spent marching, moving from one place to another, through whatever terrain was in the way, through forests, marshes, plains, mountains, deserts, or whatever other terrain is imaginable. And in the past, before industrialization and self-moving vehicles, this is even more on foot than it is later, after the introduction of motorized vehicles. And remember, as you are marching in an army, you are also exposed to heat or extreme cold, depending upon the climate and the current season. And you also are subject to logistics that are not of the modern level. So starvation of thirst, sometimes deliberate starvation of thirst with scorched earth or poisoning of waters by the enemy, was a real issue if you could not get the required supplies to the troops. And then there was also the problem of disease spreading among the ranks of the troops. Disease which could kill large parts of armies, though it was not the biggest killer. That is a myth, as most campaigns managed to evade it. However, it was still an ever-present danger in the past that the disease could spread quickly among the ranks of the troops and kill almost the entire army, due to the fact that the troops were living so closely together during a campaign, in camps, where diseases quite easily could spread from one person to another. I've now spoken about combat and what was the normal case outside of combat, but I've not even begun to speak about the terror tactics which were used in the past. As in the past, before the Geneva Conventions, rape, torture and massacres were the norm against enemy combatants and civilians. Many pre-modern armies used plunder and the promise of booty as a sort of reward system, and often this booty could be in the form of slaves. Thus the civilians after a battle, when an army took a city, could be enslaved. This was the case with the Romans and the various Arabic and other Islamic dynasties. So civilians were not left alone in the pre-modern warfare. And the massive massacres were sometimes even the norm for certain armies, such as the Mongols or the Assyrians. And sometimes these terror tactics were not only used against the enemy, but also among the ranks of their own troops, as corporal punishments, and sometimes even killing of one's own troops in order to encourage good morale or discipline was used. For example, the Romans practiced decimation, where they would kill a tenth of a unit randomly by lot. And the various Arabic dynasties during certain periods of Arabic history actually killed their own slave soldiers. And on the subject of slave soldiers, many of the combatants in pre-modern warfare were in various ways forced to fight, or at least obligated to fight through various means, not their own free choosing. These could be slave soldiers or serfs that were levied by their local landlord to fight for him. There has also existed systems of conscription of citizens in the past as well, before modern times, such as the Romans who had a system of conscription, and also the Swedish Empire was pretty early in adopting a sort of conscription system. But in any case, it meant that many people were forced into wars, not of their own choosing. And this, together with all the other things I mentioned before, made war in the past also very terrible for all people involved, and thus should be considered when thinking about this myth about warfare in the past being cleaner than it is right now. Because being forced to fight, having to endure the things I've mentioned, or commit the various atrocities I've mentioned, cannot be considered neither clean or less terrible. And I hope, my dear viewers, that this little reminder about the past has been informative for you. If you have any questions, please post them in the comment section, and don't forget to like either. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.